We always had several cars in the driveway. I had older siblings who had their driver's license. My father was a mechanic, so he usually made sure that there were some of these older cars that he kept them running. And actually, they were pretty fun to drive. And we all learned to drive with one of the older cars, the stick shift, the whole thing. But there was also usually one later model car. And I remember as a kid simply calling it the good car. Well, one day, after I had my license, and I had been driving for a while, the family, at least a few of us, mom and dad, my sister Judy and I, were going to take a trip that was maybe, let's say, 2 hours away. I don't remember for sure. And Dad handed me the key. And he said, Herb, why don't you drive? So I got in the car, the good car, to drive. Judy sat in the front with me. Mom and Dad were in the back. I had made it. And then as I'm driving along, very conscientiously, I happened to look in the rearview mirror, I peeked, and Mom and Dad were both sound asleep in the back seat. I had made it. They had entrusted me with the driving. They had entrusted me with the good car. They had entrusted me so much that they were both sound asleep. It was the most exciting realization that I had in a long time, and it was probably the scariest moment of all. Because once I realized that they were asleep, then I knew that I was responsible. Isn't it funny how we learn that things are entrusted to somebody, and two things go with that entrustment. One is responsibility, and one is accountability. So whether it's driving the car, we're responsible for keeping it on the road. We're accountable, in a sense, to mom and dad in this case. But it's the same thing as when you reach that point when you're babysitting, taking care of somebody. You've been given some responsibilities, been entrusted to you, or taking care of the pet dog, making sure the dog gets fed, or whatever it might be. We reach that point. But there's always the two steps. We're responsible, and somebody recognizes that in us. And I think responsibility is like they're putting it in our hands. But then we're held accountable to do it right. That means giving it back to them. That is the story in the vineyard today. This is our third week in a row of a vineyard parable by Jesus. And this one is probably of the three my favorite, because it's something we can recognize so well. You've got to remember, this was a good vineyard. It's described that the owner put a lot of attention into it. He created a wonderful vineyard, even with the winepress. And of course, remember, the vineyards were not just for growing table grapes. It was for making wine. And wine was served at virtually every important meal. So it was quite an important thing to have a good vineyard. And so this was well put together. And so he leased it out because he was going to be gone. He entrusted it to someone else, gave them responsibility. They took the responsibility, but they did not accept the accountability, because accountability means, okay, we have to give it back. And the mistakes we tend to make are either we take it too casually and we don't really take care of something else that doesn't belong to us, or, in this case, they took it so seriously that they claimed it as their own, and they forgot that they were tenants. Now, we are tenants. We are tenants. And the vineyard could be our faith life. We've got to share it. We've got to have it produced. The vineyard could be our very life itself. But I'd like to suggest one other thing that could be the vineyard. Tomorrow, October 4th, is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. I don't know about you, but he's my all-time number one favorite saint. Apologies to a few of the others. He's, among other things, the patron saint of the environment. In fact, when Pope Francis wrote his encyclical, Laudato Si, Our Common Home, he started it with a quote from St. Francis of Assisi, Laudato Si, praise the Lord, it's the canticle of the sun. But he writes about the earth it doesn't belong to us. We live here. We are the tenants. We are given responsibility, but we also have accountability for it. We really have to do something with it. And I think we can take the same thing as the parable says about those tenants. Sometimes we act like it's all our own and we can do whatever we want with the earth. Guess what? We have not done a very good job. It's not just the earth, it's all that grows on the earth, all the species. And in this encyclical, Pope Francis uses a wonderful term, integral ecology. And by using that term, he's basically saying it's all connected. The atmosphere itself, the oceans, the earth itself, the quality of the air, the species of plant life and animals and people, and that it's all connected around the globe. And so if the ocean temperature is going up, it does affect everybody. And if poor people are suffering quicker than people that are not poor, that affects us. Integral ecology. As tenants of this earth, we've got to do something about it. We can't just say, oh, it's not real, or it's not man-made, it's just going through a cycle. I think we're beyond that. Those decisions have already been met. We have to talk about what's really happening. And as tenants, we're not doing very well. I remember as a pastor at one of my parishes, I had a beautiful patch of chrysanthemums, mums, the perennial mums. But after they had bloomed, I hired a young man to cut them down because I wanted them to bloom the next year. And I asked him, I said, I'll pay you, but go ahead and plan to cut them down. I saw the young man later and I said, did you get the job done? He said, well, I started to cut them and I realized this was hard work, so I pulled the rest of them out. And that's how I felt. I guess I did not explain really well. I want you to cut them down so that they grow up again next year. But that was my realization, how sometimes as tenants, we're given a job and we don't do it well. We pull things out. And then what's the future? God has entrusted us with so many things. It's even better than the good car. God has given us a good earth. We have to be accountable for it and give it back to the Lord.